The food on my plate had gone cold before my aide finished speaking, and by the time he showed me the intercepted transmission, I had already stopped breathing. I remember pushing my chair back from the table so hard that it scraped across the polished metal floor of my private dining quarters aboard Galactic Union Station 9. The sound it made was sharp and ugly, like a warning that arrived too late. My aide, Fennec, was standing in front of me with his communicator held out, and his hands were trembling. In the 40 years I had known Fennec, through border skirmishes and diplomatic crises, and 2 full-scale interstellar conflicts, I had never once seen his hands tremble. My name is Virel Toshan. I am a senior diplomatic ambassador of the Dravosi Republic, and I have spent the better part of 4 decades stationed near human space. I have attended their festivals. I have eaten their food. I have laughed at their strange jokes, the ones that rely on wordplay and timing, and a peculiar willingness to find humor in suffering. I have studied their history, their art, their wars. I have learned to read the subtle shifts in their facial expressions that most species in the galaxy never bother to understand. The difference between a smile that means joy and a smile that means someone is about to do something very dangerous. I say this not to boast, but so you understand that when I tell you what happened next, I am not guessing. I am not speculating. I am not relying on second-hand intelligence reports or cultural briefings prepared by analysts who have never shared a meal with a human. I know humans better than almost any non-human in the known galaxy, and what I felt in that moment was not confusion. It was not surprise. It was dread. Pure, immediate, bone-deep dread. Fennec told me that the Kreth Dominion had conducted a raid on a human border colony called Aldenmere. The Kreth are a mid-tier predator empire. 6 systems, decent military, no diplomatic subtlety whatsoever. They had been pushing their borders outward for the last several cycles, swallowing up unclaimed territories, and picking fights with smaller civilizations who could not push back. Nobody in the Galactic Union liked them, but nobody considered them a serious threat either. They were a nuisance. A loud, aggressive, moderately dangerous nuisance. The kind of neighbor who plays their music too loud and occasionally throws things at your fence, but never quite crosses the line into the kind of behavior that justifies a full response. The raid itself was not surprising. The Kreth had been testing boundaries for months, probing the edges of human-controlled space with scout ships and surveillance drones, running small incursions that fell just below the threshold of an act of war. It was standard Kreth behavior. Push until someone pushes back, then recalibrate and push somewhere else. I had filed 6 separate diplomatic advisories about their activities in the past year alone. What was surprising, what made my blood turn to ice in my veins, was the second piece of information Fennec gave me. They had taken prisoners, 32 of them, 25 adults and 7 children. The youngest was 4 years old. I need you to understand something. When Fennec said the word children, everything changed. I am not speaking figuratively. I mean that the nature of the situation, the very physics of what was happening, shifted in a fundamental way that I could feel in my chest like a change in atmospheric pressure. Every calculation I had been running in my head about diplomatic channels and formal protests, and carefully worded resolutions to be submitted to the Galactic Union Council, vanished like smoke in a wind tunnel. Because I knew something that the Kreth apparently did not. I knew what happened to species that touched human children. It was not theory. It was not speculation. It was documented history, the kind of history that smart civilizations studied, and foolish civilizations ignored, and extinct civilizations wished they had paid attention to. I stood up from my chair and walked straight to my communications console. My hands were already moving across the controls before my conscious mind had finished deciding what to do. I entered the priority codes for the Kreth High Command and requested an immediate connection to Warlord Droven, the supreme military authority of the Kreth Dominion. I was told he was unavailable. I requested again, citing my authority as a Galactic Union ambassador with emergency standing. I was told he was in a strategic briefing and could not be disturbed. I requested a third time, and this time I did not bother with diplomatic language. I told the communications officer on the other end that if Dravan did not speak with me within the hour, the next voice he heard would not be mine, and it would not be asking politely. They connected me to a junior officer instead, a young Kreth male named Tessic, who appeared on my screen with the smug, self-satisfied expression of someone who believed his empire had just accomplished something impressive. His scales were bright with the flush of pride, and his posture was straight and confident in the way that young soldiers carry themselves when they have never experienced genuine consequences. I asked him to confirm the details of the Aldenmere raid. He confirmed them eagerly, practically glowing with enthusiasm as he described the operation. 32 prisoners, minimal resistance from the colony's defense network, clean extraction, a textbook operation, he called it. I asked him about the children. He blinked at me, confused by my tone, unable to understand why I was not impressed. They are small, he said, as though explaining something obvious to someone slow. Easy to transport. They will serve as excellent leverage when we begin negotiations with the human government for territorial concessions. Warlord Dravan believes they will significantly strengthen our bargaining position. I stared at him through the screen. I remember feeling a kind of exhaustion that went beyond tiredness, a deep, spiritual fatigue that comes from watching someone walk toward a cliff edge while smiling, and knowing that nothing you say will make them look down. You took their children, I said slowly, spacing each word out as though I were speaking to a child myself, and you think you are going to use them as bargaining chips. Tessic nodded. He was still smiling. He genuinely could not see it, could not feel it, could not understand why a senior diplomat who had been navigating galactic politics since before Tessic was born was looking at him with an expression that was equal parts horror and pity. Officer Tessic, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I need you to take what I am about to say to your warlord immediately. Do not wait. Do not file it in your after-action reports. Do not summarize it or paraphrase it or adjust the wording to make it more palatable. Tell him exactly what I tell you, word for word. Tessic looked slightly annoyed, but gestured for me to continue, the way someone waves a hand at a buzzing insect before swatting it away. You have made the worst mistake in the history of your civilization, I said. You have taken the one thing that humans will not negotiate for, will not accept the loss of, will not compromise on. Not for territory, not for resources, not for peace, not for anything. You have their children, and if you do not return every single one of them, completely unharmed, within the next planetary rotation, what comes next will not be a war. Wars have limits. Wars have rules. Wars have endings that both sides can survive. What comes next will be an erasure. Your warlord will learn the difference, and by the time he does, it will be too late for the lesson to matter. Tessic stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a short, barking laugh, the kind of sound that someone makes when they think they are dealing with a fool who has allowed fear to overwhelm his judgment. Ambassador Toshan, he said, the Kreth Dominion does not take orders from alien diplomats, and we certainly do not fear the humans. They are soft, emotional, sentimental. They waste resources on art and music, and the care of their elderly, and the education of beings who will never contribute to military readiness. They are not a serious threat to a prepared empire. I ended the call. There was nothing more I could say to him. He did not understand, and I did not have time to educate him, because education requires a willingness to learn, and Tessic had none. Instead, I contacted the Galactic Union Council directly. I filed an emergency motion for intervention, requesting that the Council authorize a mediation team to be dispatched to Kreth space immediately. I flagged it with every priority marker available to me. I cited precedent. I cited risk assessment protocols. I cited the specific articles in the Union Charter that authorized emergency action in situations involving the welfare of minors. The response came back within the hour. The Council appreciated my concern and the thoroughness of my filing. They would review the matter at their next scheduled session. The next scheduled session was 11 standard rotations away. 11 rotations. I sat back in my chair and stared at the response on my screen. The humans would not wait 11 hours, let alone 11 rotations. By the time the Council convened to discuss the matter, there would be nothing left to discuss. I spent the next several hours pulling every piece of information I could about the current state of human military readiness in the sector. I contacted intelligence contacts. I reviewed shipping manifests and fleet deployment records. I tracked communication patterns across human military frequencies. What I found did not comfort me. The humans had a carrier group stationed 2 systems away from Kreth space, led by a vessel called the Resolute. They had a rapid response force embedded at a forward operating base near the border. They had supply lines that could be activated within hours. They had, as they always did, more capability within reach than anyone expected, because humans had learned long ago that the galaxy was not a safe place, and they prepared accordingly. But what concerned me more than the ships and the soldiers and the supply lines was the silence. In the hours since the raid, the human communication channels had gone almost completely quiet. Military frequencies that normally carried routine chatter about patrol schedules and maintenance rotations and supply requests had fallen silent. Diplomatic channels that usually buzzed with trade negotiations and cultural exchange programs and visa applications had gone dead. Even the civilian frequencies, the ones where human colonists talked to each other about weather and crop yields and their children's school programs, were quiet. It was as if someone had reached into the chest of an entire civilization and pressed a finger against its beating heart, and the heart had paused, and everything connected to it had paused with it, and the galaxy was holding its breath. I knew what that silence meant. I had seen it once before, 12 years ago, when a group of freelance mercenaries had intercepted a human passenger shuttle and held the 47 occupants for ransom. The silence had lasted 6 hours. Then the humans came, and when they were finished, there was nothing left of the mercenaries except debris scattered across 3 grid squares and a warning beacon that broadcast a single message on repeat for the next 3 standard years. The message was simple. It said, "These people were under our protection." This time, the silence was deeper, heavier, more complete. Because this time, it was not just passengers, it was children, and I knew, with the certainty of someone who has studied a species for 40 years and has learned to read its heartbeat, that the silence was not hesitation, it was focus. Then, just as I was preparing to make another attempt at reaching Dravan directly, Fennec burst into my office for the 2nd time that day. He did not knock. He did not announce himself. He simply came through the door and activated the main display screen on the wall and stepped back. A broadcast was playing on the open channel, the universal frequency that every ship, station, and colony in the sector could receive without special equipment. It was a woman, human, middle-aged, with short brown hair and steady dark eyes, and a face that showed the kind of weathering that comes from years of managing a colony on a border world. The identifier tag at the bottom of the screen read, "Governor Ellen Marsh, Aldenmere Colony." She was looking directly into the camera. Her face was calm, not the artificial calm of someone forcing themselves to remain composed, but the deep, structural calm of someone who has moved past fear and past anger, and arrived at a place where there is only one thing left, and that one thing is certainty. Her voice was level. There was no tremor in it, no crack, no hint of the emotional state that anyone in her position would be expected to display. She spoke 3 words. "Give them back." That was all. No demands, no conditions, no timeline, no list of consequences, no diplomatic phrasing, just those 3 words. Broadcast to every receiver in the sector, spoken with the quiet finality of a door closing. The transmission ended. Fennec looked at me. I looked at him. And for a long moment, neither of us said anything, because there was nothing to say. Then I spoke, and my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears, like something echoing off the walls of an empty room. "It is already too late." I did not sleep that night. I sat in my office with every intelligence feed I could access running simultaneously on the screens that lined the walls, watching the situation develop with the growing certainty of someone watching the ground crack beneath a building that everyone else insists is structurally sound. You can see the fractures spreading. You can hear the groaning of materials pushed beyond their tolerance, but you cannot force people to leave a building they believe will never fall. By morning, I had managed to secure a direct communication channel to Warlord Draven himself. It had taken every diplomatic favor I had accumulated over 4 decades, a personal call to the Kreth trade minister who owed me for a grain embargo I had helped him navigate 6 years earlier, and a strongly worded message to the Kreth Intelligence Directorate reminding them that I had personally buried 3 separate intelligence reports that would have been embarrassing to their operations if made public. I do not normally trade in that kind of currency, but this was not a normal situation, and the rules I normally operated by had stopped applying the moment 7 children were taken from their beds. When Dravan's face appeared on my screen, I felt a brief, foolish surge of hope that perhaps I could still prevent what was coming. Perhaps I could find the right words, the right arguments, the right combination of logic and history and self-preservation instinct that would make this massive, armored, arrogant military commander understand what he had set in motion. Dravan was exactly what I expected. Massive, even for a Kreth. Armored even in his own command center. Because that was the Kreth way, wearing layers of ceremonial plates that doubled as functional protection. His face was marked with ritual scarification that traced the battles he had won and the territories he had claimed. A living map of his achievements carved into his own skin. His eyes had the flat, confident look of someone who had risen to the top of a predator hierarchy and had never once been seriously challenged on the way up. He looked at me the way a large animal looks at a small one that has wandered into its territory. Not with hostility, not with aggression. Just mild curiosity and complete disinterest in anything I might have to say. "Ambassador Toshan," he said, "I am told you have been causing difficulties for my communications staff. I have agreed to this call as a courtesy to the diplomatic relationship between our governments. Speak quickly. I have matters to attend to." I did not waste time on pleasantries. "Warlord Dravan, I am calling to urge you, in the strongest possible terms I can convey, to release the human prisoners you took from Aldenmere. All of them. Immediately. Without conditions. Without negotiations. Without delay." Dravan leaned back in his command chair. The metal groaned under his weight. "And why would I do that, Ambassador? The prisoners are our leverage. The humans have territory we want. Rich mineral deposits in the systems adjacent to Kreth space that would fuel our expansion for the next 50 cycles. They have resources we need. They have tactical positions we covet. We will negotiate, and the prisoners ensure they negotiate fairly. Honestly, without the arrogance that typically characterizes human diplomacy. They will not negotiate," I said. "Not for this, not when children are involved." "Then they will learn to negotiate," Dravan said, and there was a hard, sharp edge in his voice that told me he was not accustomed to being contradicted and did not intend to develop the habit. "The Kreth Dominion has made its decision. The prisoners remain in our custody until the humans meet our terms. This conversation is a waste of both our time." I took a breath. I had prepared for this response. I had spent the sleepless hours of the previous night rehearsing what I was going to say, refining the arguments, selecting the historical examples that would carry the most weight with a military mind. I knew I would likely get only one chance to make Dravan understand, one chance to crack through the armor of his certainty before events overtook us both. "Warlord, do you know what happened to the Velkari Consortium?" Dravan frowned, the deep furrows of his scarred face shifting like tectonic plates. "The Velkari? They were a minor empire in the Outer Rim, collapsed several decades ago. Internal instability, factional disputes, the usual decay that afflicts empires without strong leadership. What relevance does a dead empire have to the current situation?" "They did not collapse," I said. "They were dismantled, systematically, methodically, over the course of 4 standard years, by the humans." Dravan's frown deepened. "I have read no such report in our intelligence archives. Because there is very little left to report on, and because most civilizations that know the full story prefer not to discuss it. It makes them uncomfortable. It reminds them that the galaxy is not as orderly as they like to believe." I paused, letting the silence do its work. "The Velkari were a 200-world empire. They had a fleet 3 times the size of yours. They had defensive systems that were considered state-of-the-art for their era. They had alliances, trade networks, intelligence operations, and a military tradition that stretched back centuries. They were, by any reasonable measure, a significant regional power. Not a superpower, but the kind of empire that other empires took seriously. Get to your point, Ambassador. I do not need a history lecture. You need this one. The Velkari captured a human colony transport, 60 passengers, including 23 families with children. The Velkari brought them to one of their processing centers and followed standard interrogation protocol. Part of that protocol involved separating the adults from the children, different holding areas, different facilities. The Velkhari considered this a routine administrative procedure. They filed the paperwork, assigned the cell blocks, and moved on to other business. They did not think anything of it. To them, it was bureaucracy. I leaned closer to the screen, close enough that Draven could see the light reflecting off my eyes and know that I was not simply reciting facts. I was delivering a warning. The humans sent a diplomatic envoy first, a shuttle with a senior ambassador and a small delegation. They asked for the return of the prisoners, all of them, adults and children. The Velkhari refused, citing sovereign rights and territorial jurisdiction and a dozen other legal frameworks that they had constructed specifically to justify doing whatever they wanted. The humans asked again. The Velkhari refused again, more firmly this time, annoyed that these soft, emotional beings were not respecting the established order. The humans asked a third time. I paused. On the third refusal, the human ambassador, a woman named Catherine Holt, stood up from the negotiation table. She looked the Velkhari delegation leader directly in the eye. She said 5 words. She said, "This is the last time we will ask." Then she turned around and walked out of the room. She did not slam the door. She did not raise her voice. She simply left. Draven was watching me now, not with fear, not yet, but with the kind of attention that a predator gives to an unfamiliar sound in the underbrush. Within one standard cycle, the humans had identified every facility where prisoners were being held. Not some of them, all of them. Across multiple worlds, across multiple star systems, through layers of Velkhari security and bureaucratic misdirection that should have taken months to penetrate. The humans did it in hours. Within 2 cycles, they had extracted every single prisoner, every adult, every child. The Velkhari security forces barely understood what was happening before it was over. Their alarms went off after the humans were already gone. Impressive, Draven said, though the words sounded reluctant. But a rescue operation, however well executed, is not the same as defeating an empire. The humans recovered their people. Good for them. That does not explain the fall of the Velkhari. Because the rescue was not the end. It was the beginning. The humans got their people back, Warlord. And then they did not go home. They did not declare victory. They did not negotiate a peace treaty or accept reparations or agree to a mutual stand-down. They stayed, and they began to work. Work, Draven repeated. What kind of work? They spent the next 4 years tracking down every Velkhari official who had been involved in the capture, processing, and separation of those families. Every commander who gave the order, every officer who carried it out, every bureaucrat who assigned the cell blocks and filed the transfer documents, every guard who stood watch over a child separated from their parent. The humans found them all. It did not matter where they fled. It did not matter which allied governments sheltered them, or which anonymous stations they hid on. The humans were patient, Warlord. They were thorough. They did not forget a single name. They tracked them for 4 years? 4 years. Without pause, without wavering, without ever once deciding that the cost of continuing was greater than the cost of stopping. And when they found each one, they brought them before a tribunal, not a human tribunal, an independent judicial body assembled from neutral species, with full transparency, open proceedings, evidence presented, and cross-examined. The humans did not simply punish the Velkhari. They made them answer for what they had done. They forced the entire galaxy to watch. And by the time the last trial concluded, the Velkhari consortium was not just defeated, it was erased from the political map of the galaxy. I let those words settle into the silence between us. Their worlds are still there, their people still exist, but their government, their military, their empire as a political entity, gone, dissolved, replaced by a collection of independent states that have never managed to reunify. And it all started, Warlord, because they took human children away from their parents. Draven was quiet for several long moments. I could see him processing what I had said, turning it over in his mind, measuring it against his own experience. I could see him weighing the historical example against his assessment of his own capabilities, running internal calculations about the relative strength of the Kreth versus the strength of the Velkhari. And I could see, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, the moment he decided that the comparison did not apply to him. The Velkari were fractured, he said. Their internal politics made them vulnerable. Rival factions, competing interests, a military leadership that was divided against itself. The Kreth are unified. We have one command structure, one warlord, one chain of authority. We do not have the same weaknesses. Warlord, you are not listening to me. The structure of the Velkari was irrelevant. Their unity or lack of it was irrelevant. Their fleet size, their defensive capabilities, their alliances, none of it mattered. Because humans do not fight wars the way other species do. All species fight wars the same way, Draven said. Ships, soldiers, strategy, resources, the side with more wins. No, I said, and I heard my own voice harden in a way that surprised me. That is how you fight wars. That is how the Kreth fight wars, and the Jalin, and the Torun, and every other species in this galaxy that approaches conflict as a cost-benefit calculation. You weigh how much territory you can gain against how many ships you might lose. You decide whether the objective is worth the price. You set acceptable casualty thresholds, and strategic withdrawal points and conditions under which you will negotiate. That is rational. That is sensible. That is how wars should be fought. I leaned forward until my face filled Draven's screen. Humans do not do this. Not when their children are involved. When you take a human child, something changes inside them. Every calculation stops. Every cost-benefit analysis is discarded. Every strategic framework and tactical doctrine and rational assessment of acceptable loss is thrown away. They make a single decision, and that decision is absolute. The decision is, this will end. Not this might end. Not this should end. This will end. And then they commit everything. Every ship, every soldier, every resource. Every ounce of will and fury and endurance their species can bring to bear. There is no limit. There is no threshold beyond which they decide the cost is too high. They will spend 10 ships to save one child. They will spend 100. They will spend their entire fleet and build another one. Draven stared at me. That is not strategy, that is insanity. Yes, I said. Exactly. That is precisely what it is. And you cannot defeat insanity with strategy, Warlord. You cannot outmaneuver an enemy who does not care about losing. You cannot find a pressure point on a being that has no interest in self-preservation. You can only do one thing. Give them back their children and hope, pray, beg every deity you have ever believed in that they are still willing to forgive you. Because if you wait too long, if the window of forgiveness closes, then nothing you offer will matter. Not territory, not treasure, not your own life, nothing. For one moment, one brief, flickering moment, I thought I had reached him. I saw something shift behind his eyes, a crack in the armor of his certainty, a hairline fracture in the wall of confidence that he had built around himself. For that one moment, doubt entered the room and sat down beside him. But then, it left. The crack sealed itself. His face hardened. His jaw set. His scarred features rearranged themselves into the mask of authority and pride that he wore like his armor, a second skin that he had never learned to take off. The Kreth do not yield to threats, Ambassador, he said. Not from diplomats, not from humans, not from anyone. We will maintain our position. The humans will negotiate on our terms, or they will discover the consequences of challenging a prepared and unified empire. I felt something inside me collapse, not dramatically, not with a crash, quietly, like a bridge that has been holding weight for too long, and finally, silently, settles into the water beneath it. Warlord Draven, I said quietly, I have done everything I can. I have warned you. I have shown you the history. I have explained, as clearly as I am able, what is coming. When it arrives, and it will arrive, please remember that you were given every chance to prevent it. Please remember that someone stood in front of you and told you the truth, and you chose not to listen. Before he could respond, my aide Fennec appeared at the edge of the frame. He was holding a data tablet, and his face had gone pale in a way that I had never seen before, a grayish, drained look that made him appear suddenly old. Ambassador, he said, 3 human warships have just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Kreth-controlled space. My stomach dropped. What are they doing? Nothing, Fennec said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. They are not hailing anyone. They are not transmitting any messages. They have not raised weapons or activated defensive shields. They are just advancing, slowly, in formation. I turned back to the screen. Dravan had heard Fennec. I could see it in the sudden rigidity of his posture, the way his shoulders tightened and his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. But his face remained hard, his jaw set, his pride unbroken. 3 ships, he said, against the entire Kreth fleet. You see, Ambassador, this is what I mean by human weakness. Emotional gestures instead of strategic thinking. 3 ships are not a threat. They are a tantrum. Those 3 ships are not a gesture, Warlord, I said. They are not a tantrum, and they are not a bluff. They are a message, the first sentence of a message. And if you are smart, if you have any instinct for survival left beneath all that armor and all that pride, you will read it before the next sentence arrives. Dravan cut the call. I sat back in my chair and stared at the blank screen for a long time. The room was quiet. The air recyclers hummed. Somewhere in the station, I could hear the distant clang of maintenance work being done on a docking arm. I pulled up the tactical display and watched 3 small blue dots moving slowly, steadily, silently through the void toward the Kreth border. No demands, no threats, just movement, just certainty, just the quiet, terrible promise that more was coming. And I knew, with the same certainty that those human children sitting in their cell knew, that more was coming. Dravan did not believe me. I could see it in his eyes. He thought his fleet would hold. He thought his borders were secure. He thought the humans would see reason and come to the negotiating table and accept his terms like every other species he had ever pushed around. He was wrong, and the worst part was, he would not understand how wrong he was until it was far too late to change course. By then, the only question would be how much of his empire remained standing when the humans were finished. I poured a glass of water and drank it slowly. My hands were steady. The rest of me was not. 2 days passed, and I spent every hour of them aboard a neutral observation post positioned on the edge of Kreth-controlled space. The post was a small, unremarkable structure, a converted mining platform that the Galactic Union used for exactly this kind of situation, monitoring developing conflicts from a safe distance while pretending to be impartial. I had my intelligence feeds, my communication arrays, my tactical displays, and a growing sense of helplessness that sat in my stomach like a stone. And in those 2 days, I watched something happen that I had only witnessed once before in my entire career. Something that most species in the galaxy have never seen and would not believe if you described it to them. The sector went quiet. Not the ordinary kind of quiet that comes from a lull in trade activity or a holiday cycle on one of the major commerce worlds. This was different. This was the silence that descends over a forest when a large predator begins to move through the undergrowth. Every creature that recognizes the signs goes still. Every creature that does not simply feels the absence of sound and grows uneasy without understanding why. The birds stop singing. The insects stop buzzing. The wind itself seems to hold its breath. Trade ships that normally crossed Kreth-adjacent space on their regular routes began rerouting. At first, it was just a handful. The cautious ones. The experienced captains who had been navigating contested space long enough to read the signs. The ones who had seen what happens when major powers begin positioning their fleets and had learned to trust their instincts over their schedules. They adjusted their courses quietly, without filing formal route change requests, simply pointing their ships in different directions and adding days to their journeys without a word of complaint. Then the rest followed. Within 36 hours, every major shipping lane within 3 systems of Kreth space was empty. Cargo haulers that had paid premiums for fast-track routing through the sector were accepting massive delays and financial penalties rather than fly through the space between the human fleet and the Kreth border. Insurance companies stopped underwriting transit through the region entirely. Pirate channels went dead. The freelance raiders and smugglers and opportunists who normally operated in the gray zones between empires, picking off straggling cargo ships and running contraband through poorly patrolled corridors, simply vanished. These were beings who made their living by taking risks, beings who routinely flew into contested space with nothing but speed and audacity to protect them. And even they wanted no part of what was building between the humans and the Kreth. Whatever profit margin existed in the region was not worth being caught between those two forces when the moment arrived. The nomad fleets changed course. These massive civilian convoys, some of them comprising hundreds of vessels, drifted between star systems trading goods, and stories, and cultural artifacts. They were supposed to be neutral. They flew no flags, claimed no territory, and were recognized by every major civilization as non-combatants. But 3 separate fleets adjusted their trajectories to swing wide of the Kreth border, adding weeks to their wandering journeys without hesitation. When one of the fleet captains was asked why by a journalist, he reportedly said, "We are neutral, not stupid." Everyone in the sector understood what was happening. Every species, every government, every independent operator, with even a basic understanding of galactic affairs, could read the signs. The humans were coming for their children, and the space between here and there was about to become the most dangerous place in the known galaxy. Everyone understood, everyone except the Kreth. I contacted the other ambassadors stationed in the region, reaching out through secure diplomatic channels to gauge the response of the wider galactic community. What I found confirmed my worst fears. The Jalene Collective had already withdrawn their entire diplomatic staff from Kreth space, not just reduced their presence, or pulled back to essential personnel. Gone. Every ambassador, every aide, every support staff member, evacuated on fast transports within hours of the first human warships appearing at the border. When I contacted the Jalene ambassador, a seasoned diplomat named Verith, who had been working the region for almost as long as I had, she looked at me through the screen, as though I had asked her why someone would leave a building that was actively on fire. "We have no interest in being present when the humans arrive," she said. "And respectfully, Virel, neither should you. Whatever is about to happen between the humans and the Kreth is not our affair. It is not something we can mediate. It is not something we can influence. It is something we can only survive by not being in the way." "You believe it will be that severe?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I believe," Verith said carefully, "that the Kreth have done something that no rational civilization does. They have given the humans a reason, not an excuse, not a provocation, a reason. And a human with a reason is the most dangerous thing in this galaxy. You know this better than I do." The Torun Republic had issued a formal travel advisory to their citizens. The Torun were known throughout the galaxy for their careful, measured approach to diplomacy, the kind of species that used 12 words where 3 would do, and never committed to a position until they had analyzed it from every conceivable angle. Their travel advisories were normally masterpieces of diplomatic vagueness, full of phrases like "elevated situational awareness recommended" and "travelers should exercise informed judgment." This one was blunt. It said, "Do not enter Kreth-controlled space for any reason until further notice." When I contacted the Torun ambassador, a meticulous being named Halvorn who kept detailed statistical models of every conflict in the region, he told me something that I have not been able to forget. "We ran the projections," he said. "Every scenario we could model, every variable we could account for, every possible combination of fleet movements and diplomatic interventions and tactical outcomes. We modeled Kreth surrender. We modeled Kreth resistance. We modeled partial compliance, full defiance, third-party intervention, and a dozen other permutations. And, in every single projection, in 100% of the scenarios we modeled, the humans recover their children. Every time. Without exception. The only variable, the only factor that changed between scenarios, was how much of the Kreth dominion was left standing when the humans were finished." "What determined that variable?" Halvorn paused. His expression shifted in a way that I found difficult to read, something between professional detachment and genuine unease. "The condition of the children," he said. "If the children are unharmed, the humans exercise restraint. Significant restraint. They dismantle the military threat, remove the responsible leadership, establish safeguards, and withdraw. If the children have been harmed in any way, if they have been mistreated, if they have been frightened or hurt, or subjected to conditions that a human would consider unacceptable for a child. He trailed off and shook his head. We did not bother completing those projections, Virel. The numbers stopped making sense. The resource commitment the humans were willing to make in those scenarios exceeded every model we had for rational military behavior. Our analysts thought the data was corrupted. It was not corrupted. It was simply recording a variable that our models were not designed to handle. What variable? Parental response, Halvorn said quietly. There is no mathematical framework for it. It does not follow patterns. It does not conform to resource allocation models. It simply exists, like gravity, and everything else bends around it. That conversation stayed with me as I sat in the observation post, watching the tactical display and counting the human ships that continued to arrive at the edge of Kreth space. 3 had become 5 by the end of the first day. 5 had become 7 by mid-afternoon of the second. By nightfall, there were 9. Each one dropped out of faster-than-light travel at precisely calculated intervals, emerging from the void with perfect formation discipline and joined the advancing line. They still had not fired a single shot. They still had not issued a single demand. They still had not opened a single communication channel to the Kreth. They were simply there, moving forward, closing the distance with the slow, deliberate patience of something that had no doubt about the outcome and therefore felt no urgency about the timing. The Kreth border fleet, a respectable force of 26 warships and a dozen support vessels, was positioned in a defensive formation facing the advancing humans. From a purely numerical standpoint, the Kreth had the advantage: more ships, more guns, more tonnage. By the standard calculations that military strategists across the galaxy use to assess fleet engagements, the Kreth should have been confident. They were not confident. I could tell by their communications. Intercepted chatter from the Kreth fleet showed increasing anxiety among the crews. Officers were requesting clarification on rules of engagement. Pilots were asking questions about evacuation protocols. Someone on one of the destroyers had filed an anonymous query with the ship's information system asking about the Velkari consortium. The word was spreading, even among the Kreth. Not the full story, not the detailed history I had given Draven. Just whispers, just fragments. Just enough to make soldiers look at those 9 advancing ships and wonder if they were looking at the beginning of something that could not be stopped. I made one more attempt to change the course of events. I contacted Rothan, the Kreth sub-commander I had worked with during the border dispute 2 years earlier. When his face appeared on my screen, I could see immediately that the situation was wearing on him. His scales had taken on a pale, grayish hue that Kreth displayed when under sustained stress, and his eyes kept darting to something off-screen, probably a tactical readout showing him the same formation of human ships that I was watching. "Ambassador Toshan," he said, "I suspected you would call. I need you to do something for me, Rothan. Something that might change the course of this entire situation. If you are going to ask me to convince Draven to release the prisoners, I have already tried. He will not listen. He has convinced himself that the human fleet is a bluff, that they will not risk a full engagement over 32 individuals. That is not what I am going to ask. I need you to go see the children." He frowned, his scarred brow ridges drawing together. "See them? Why?" "Go to the holding facility where they are being kept. Walk to their cell, stand outside it and look at them. Observe how they are being held, what their condition is, how they are behaving. Then call me back and tell me what you saw. To what purpose? Because I need you to understand what the humans are coming for. Not as an abstraction, not as a data point in a strategic briefing, not as a number in a diplomatic communique. I need you to see them with your own eyes, so that when you look at those 9 ships on your tactical display, you understand exactly what is driving them forward." Rothan hesitated. I could see the reluctance in the set of his jaw and the way his eyes shifted away from the screen. Some part of him knew, instinctively, that seeing the children would change something inside him that could not be changed back. Knowledge, once gained, cannot be returned. Understanding, once achieved, cannot be unachieved. But he agreed. Because Rothan, despite his loyalty to the Kreth military hierarchy, possessed something rare among his people: a conscience. He called me back 1 hour and 14 minutes later. When his face appeared on the screen, I barely recognized him. The pale gray of stress had been replaced by something else, something deeper and more permanent. He looked like someone who had walked into a room and found, waiting for him there, a truth he had spent his entire life avoiding. "I went to the holding facility," he said. His voice was different than before, quieter, more deliberate, as though each word required careful selection, and the wrong one might shatter something fragile. "Tell me what you saw." "There are 7 of them. The youngest appears to be approximately 4 human years. The oldest is approximately 12. They are being held in a standard detention cell, the kind we use for low-risk prisoners. It is clean. The environmental controls are functioning properly. They have been given food and water. Physically, they appear unharmed." "And?" Rothan paused. He seemed to be searching for words that could capture what he had experienced, reaching into his vocabulary for terms that had never been needed before, and finding nothing adequate. "They are not afraid, Ambassador." I waited. I have seen prisoners before, many times. I have seen soldiers captured in battle, their eyes wild with the shock of defeat. I have seen diplomats taken during negotiations, trying to maintain their dignity while their hands shook. I have seen civilians rounded up during territorial acquisitions, weeping, pleading, offering anything they had in exchange for their freedom. Fear is universal. Every species I have ever encountered, every being I have ever seen in captivity, responds with some variation of the same fundamental terror. The details differ, the expressions vary, but the core experience is the same. They are afraid, and they want it to stop. He shook his head slowly. These children are not afraid. The older ones have organized the younger ones into a structured group. They have built a shelter in the corner of the cell, using the blankets and sleeping pads they were given, a kind of small enclosed space. The 12-year-old, a female child, has clearly taken charge. She has assigned roles to each of the other children based on their ages and capabilities. The older ones take shifts watching the door, sitting near the entrance to the cell with their backs straight and their eyes open. The younger ones stay inside the blanket shelter when it is not their turn to eat or exercise. They have a schedule. They have rules. They have a system. What else? She was teaching them a song. Rothan said this with a strange intonation, as though the words themselves tasted unfamiliar in his mouth. When I entered the observation corridor outside their cell, I could hear it before I saw them. The 12-year-old was sitting in the middle of the cell, with 4 of the younger children arranged around her in a semicircle. She was singing a melody, a few notes at a time, and then waiting while the younger ones repeated it back to her. It was in their language. I did not understand the words, but the melody was gentle, simple, repetitive in the way that songs for young ones tend to be, the kind of sound that belongs in a warm room with soft lighting, not in a detention cell on a military installation. He looked at me through the screen, and I saw in his eyes the thing that I had hoped he would find: understanding. Why are they not afraid, Ambassador? They are children. They are in a cell, surrounded by beings larger and stronger than them, cut off from their families, in a place they have never been before. Everything about their situation should produce fear. Every survival instinct they possess should be screaming at them. And instead, a 12-year-old girl is sitting on the floor of a prison teaching songs to 4-year-olds. Why? I had been waiting for him to ask that question, and I gave him the only answer I had, the only answer that mattered. Because they know someone is coming for them. Rothan stared at me. Human children are raised with one absolute certainty, Rothan. From the moment they are born, from the first time they are held in their parents' arms, they are taught one thing above all else: not how to fight, not how to survive, not how to calculate odds or assess threats or prepare for the worst. They are taught that someone will always come for them. It does not matter how far away they are. It does not matter how dangerous the situation is. It does not matter how powerful the enemy is, or how impossible the odds seem. Someone will come. That is not hope. That is not optimism. That is not a comforting story told to help children sleep. It is a fact that has been proven so many times, across so many centuries of human history, that their children treat it the same way they treat the laws of physics. It is simply the way the universe works. But how can they be so certain? They are children. They do not know what forces are arrayed against them. They do not understand the military capabilities of the Kreth Dominion. They cannot comprehend the strategic complexities of the situation or the diplomatic obstacles that stand between them and rescue. How can they sit there, in a cell, surrounded by enemies, and believe? Because they do not need to understand any of those things. They do not need to know the size of your fleet, or the strength of your defenses, or the political dynamics of the Galactic Union. They only need to know one thing, that the people who love them have never, in the entire history of their species, failed to come. Human parents do not leave their children behind. Not ever, not for any reason, not under any circumstances. That is not a cultural value. Rothan, it is not a political ideology or a military doctrine. It is a biological imperative so deep, so fundamental, so woven into the fabric of what it means to be human, that it might as well be a law of nature. I pointed at the screen. That 12-year-old girl sitting in your cell teaching songs to frightened children is not putting on a brave face. She is not pretending to be calm for the sake of the younger ones. She is calm because she knows, with the same certainty that she knows the sun will rise over her home world tomorrow morning, that her parents are already on their way. The only question in her mind is not whether they will come. It is how long she needs to keep the younger ones safe until they arrive. Rothan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who has seen something beautiful and terrible at the same time. What do I do, Ambassador? Convince Dravan to return every prisoner. All of them, now, before the humans get any closer, before the countdown they sent reaches 0. He will not listen to me. He sees the human fleet, and he thinks it is a bluff. He believes that 9 ships against 26 is a losing proposition, and that the humans are too rational to take those odds. It is not a bluff, Rothan, and they are not looking at odds. You think you are holding 32 prisoners. You are not. You are holding 7 children with 25 people who love them. That is what Dravan does not understand. That is what your entire military hierarchy does not understand. You did not capture leverage, you captured a reason. The most dangerous reason in the galaxy. A reason that turns every human who hears about it into a soldier, whether they have ever held a weapon or not. Rothan ended the call. I do not know if he tried to speak with Dravan afterward. I do not know if his words would have made any difference, whether the image of that 12-year-old girl singing in a cell would have been enough to crack through the fortress of Dravan's pride. Because less than an hour after our conversation ended, something happened that made every conversation, every warning, every diplomatic effort completely irrelevant. I was monitoring the tactical display when Fennec stepped beside me and pointed to a new data stream scrolling across the secondary screen. An encoded transmission had been intercepted from the human fleet, directed at the Kreth Dominion's central command frequency. Our systems managed to decode it within minutes, not because our decryption capabilities were particularly advanced, but because the humans had used a basic cipher. They wanted it to be decoded. They wanted every receiver in the sector to read it. The message was not a demand. It was not a threat. It was not an ultimatum or a declaration of war or a request for negotiation. It was a countdown. Just numbers, descending, measured in standard galactic time units, dropping steadily, silently, relentlessly toward 0. No accompanying text, no explanation, no context. Just numbers, getting smaller, ticking away with the mechanical precision of a heartbeat. I stared at those numbers on the screen. In 40 years of studying humans, I had seen them respond to every conceivable situation in every conceivable way. I had seen them angry and joyful and grieving and afraid. I had watched them negotiate and fight and surrender and celebrate. I had witnessed their patience and their impatience, their mercy and their wrath, their capacity for forgiveness and their talent for remembering. I had never seen them send a countdown before. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. My hands, the hands that had signed treaties and drafted resolutions and steadied themselves across 4 decades of galactic politics, were trembling like the hands of a first-year aide receiving his initial crisis briefing. Because a countdown is different from a threat. A threat says, here is what we might do. A countdown says, here is what we are going to do, And here is exactly how long you have before it begins. There is no ambiguity in a countdown, no room for interpretation, no diplomatic space for creative reframing or face-saving compromise. Just numbers, getting smaller. I watched them fall, and I knew that whatever came next would be something the galaxy had never seen before. The final hours moved with a strange, distorted quality, the way time behaves when you are waiting for something inevitable. Each minute felt simultaneously endless and far too short, as though the universe itself could not decide whether to slow down and savor the tension or rush forward to the conclusion. I stayed at the observation post. Fennec had suggested, repeatedly and with increasing urgency, that I relocate to a safer position further from Kreth space. The observation post was technically neutral territory, but neutrality is a concept that depends on everyone agreeing to respect it, and in the space between an advancing human fleet and a Kreth empire that refused to yield, concepts were becoming fragile things. I refused to move. I had spent 40 years trying to understand humans, and I was not going to look away at the moment of greatest significance. Whatever happened next, someone needed to see it clearly, record it accurately, and preserve it for the species who would study it afterward. That someone was going to be me. The countdown had been running for 18 hours. The numbers were getting small. Across the sector, I knew that on stations and ships and in government offices on a dozen worlds, beings were watching those same numbers with a combination of fascination and dread. The countdown had become the center of gravity for the entire region, pulling attention and awareness toward it like a collapsing star. Then the Kreth did something that made my chest tighten in a way I had not expected. The Kreth military surveillance system had, at some point during the children's captivity, recorded Sophie teaching the younger ones their song. Perhaps it was routine monitoring. Perhaps an officer had flagged it as potentially having intelligence value, though what intelligence value a children's song could possess, I could not imagine. Whatever the reason, the recording existed in the Kreth security archives. And someone on the human fleet, using surveillance technology that the Kreth evidently did not know the humans possessed, had been listening. The humans had intercepted the recording. They had heard their children singing in a prison cell. With less than 6 hours remaining on the countdown, the 9 human warships began broadcasting that song on every frequency available to them, every military channel, every civilian band, every emergency wavelength, every communication frequency that any receiver in the sector could pick up. The same gentle, simple melody that a 12-year-old girl had been singing to frightened children in a detention cell, now pouring out of the speakers of 9 warships and filling the empty spaces between the stars with a sound that had no business being there. It was not a weapon. It was not a psychological warfare tactic, at least not in any sense that the Kreth military would have recognized. It was a message, but not to the Kreth. It was a message to the children, to Sophie, and the 6 others sitting in their blanket shelter, waiting with their impossible, unshakable certainty. The message said, "We hear you. We know you are there. We know what you are singing. We are coming." When the Kreth intercepted the broadcast and realized what it was, the effect was immediate and visceral. Rothan told me later that the mood aboard the Kreth command ships shifted within minutes. Officers who had been confidently running tactical simulations stopped mid-calculation and looked at each other with expressions that nobody wanted to name. Soldiers who had been preparing for a standard military engagement, the kind they had trained for, the kind they understood, began asking questions that their commanders could not answer. Because this was not how enemies behaved. Enemies sent threats. Enemies broadcast demands and ultimatums and displays of force. Enemies tried to intimidate you with shows of strength. They did not broadcast a children's song on every frequency in the sector. They did not fill the void between the stars with the sound of a 12-year-old girl's voice. That was something else entirely, something that did not fit into any tactical framework or strategic doctrine that the Kreth had ever developed. And things that do not fit into frameworks are, for military minds, far more frightening than things that do. Dravan, to his credit, or perhaps to his enduring foolishness, did not panic immediately. But he began to negotiate, and the speed with which he did so told me that the song had unsettled him more than any fleet formation or weapons display ever could. It had gotten inside his head. Not the sound itself, but what it represented. The knowledge that the humans had been listening to their children, that they knew exactly where they were, that they had been close enough to hear a lullaby through the walls of a military installation. Draven sent an emergency transmission to the human flagship. I intercepted it through the observation post's monitoring systems and decoded it in real time. It was a formal offer, dressed in the rigid ceremonial language that the Kreth used for high-level diplomatic communications. He would return the adult prisoners immediately as a gesture of good faith and sovereign generosity. In exchange, the humans would halt their advance and enter into formal territorial negotiations. The children would remain in comfortable custody and would be released in good condition once an agreement was reached. He would keep 2 children as what he called security assurances. When I read those words on my screen, something inside me broke, not in a dramatic way, not with a scream or a shout. I simply stood up from my chair, so fast that it toppled over behind me, and spoke to the empty room with a voice that I did not recognize as my own. You do not keep any of them. Not one. Not a single one. Give them all back. Right now. Every child, every adult, everyone you took. Give them back. And then get on your knees and beg. Beg that they will let this end. Because if you keep even one of those children for even one more hour, what happens next will not be something you can recover from. Fennec stared at me from across the room. In 40 years of working together, he had never heard me raise my voice. The human response to Draven's offer came in the simplest possible form. The countdown did not change. The numbers kept dropping. The song kept playing. Draven sent a second offer within the hour. He would return all prisoners, children included, if the humans agreed to a mutual non-aggression pact, withdrew their fleet from the Kreth border region, and recognized Kreth's sovereignty over the disputed mineral deposits in the adjacent systems. It was, by Kreth standards, an enormous concession, the kind of offer that would have been celebrated as a diplomatic victory if it had been accepted. By human standards, it was something far worse than an insult. It was a transaction. It placed a price tag on the return of children, and the humans had no interest in paying for something that should never have been taken. The countdown did not change. The song kept playing. Draven sent a third offer. This one was stripped of conditions. Unconditional release. All prisoners returned immediately. No terms, no demands, no concessions required. Just give them back, and the situation ends. For the first time since the countdown began, the numbers stopped moving. They held perfectly still for exactly 90 seconds, while the galaxy held its breath. Then they resumed. Slower now, but still descending. I understood that pause later, though I did not understand it in the moment. The humans were not considering the offer. 90 seconds is not enough time for a fleet commander to consult with civilian leadership, draft a response, and communicate a decision. The pause was a signal. It said, "We hear you. You are close, but not close enough." Because Draven had offered to return the prisoners, but he had not offered to guarantee that this would never happen again. And humans, I had learned across 4 decades of studying them, did not simply solve problems. They ensured those problems could never recur. The countdown reached its final hour. Across the Kreth defense network, ships were scrambling into battle formation. Defense platforms orbiting Kreth installations were powered to maximum output. Ground-based shield generators activated. Troop garrisons were placed on their highest alert status. Draven had finally, belatedly accepted that the humans were not performing a demonstration. They were executing an operation, and he was preparing to meet them with everything the Kreth had. He was preparing for the wrong thing. With 47 minutes remaining on the countdown, the Kreth holding facility where the children were being held went silent. Communications from the facility to Kreth command dropped. Surveillance feeds stopped transmitting. The power grid fluctuated for approximately 4 seconds, and then restabilized. But when the security systems came back online and the guards checked the monitoring screens, the cells were empty. Every prisoner was gone. All 7 children. All 25 adults. 32 people who had been sitting in locked cells inside a military installation on a defended Kreth world had simply vanished, as though they had been lifted out of the building by an invisible hand. The Kreth ground commander sent a frantic, barely coherent report to Draven's flagship. No alarms had been triggered. No perimeter sensors had detected a breach. No guards had been incapacitated or even encountered anyone who should not have been there. The facility's security systems showed green across every parameter. The locks on the cell doors had not been forced. They had been opened from the inside using Kreth security codes. It took the Kreth nearly 2 hours to piece together what had happened, and by then, the answer no longer mattered strategically. But I will tell you what they discovered, because it says something fundamental about humans that even 40 years of study had not fully prepared me for. The human special forces teams had been on the ground before the fleet arrived. Not hours before, days before. They had entered Kreth-controlled space, using methods that bypassed every detection system the Kreth had in place, because those detection systems were designed to find ships and energy signatures and electronic transmissions. They were not designed to find 6 humans in pressure suits drifting through an asteroid field on momentum alone, without power, without communications, without any electronic signature whatsoever, crossing the gap between neutral space and the Kreth world, using nothing but pre-calculated trajectories and patience. They had landed on the planet's surface using atmospheric entry techniques, adapted from extreme sport activities that humans performed recreationally, dropping through the atmosphere in specially designed suits that dissipated heat and radar signature simultaneously. They had moved across the surface to the holding facility on foot, over the course of 3 days, using terrain-following movement and natural concealment methods that were not military in origin. They were adapted from hunting and tracking techniques that humans had developed over hundreds of thousands of years on their homeworld, skills refined across an evolutionary history that predated the invention of metal tools. While the Kreth were scanning the skies for incoming warships and monitoring their sensor arrays for electronic warfare attacks and preparing their fleet for a conventional space engagement, the human teams were already inside the perimeter, already watching, already mapping the patrol routes and security rotations and guard shift changes, already learning the facility's rhythms the way a hunter learns the rhythms of the forest. The countdown, the fleet, the song broadcast on every frequency, all of it had been a distraction. Not a military distraction in the traditional sense, not a feint designed to draw forces away from the target, something more subtle, more human, an emotional distraction. The fleet drew the attention of the Kreth military leadership upward, toward the sky, toward the advancing ships and the ticking numbers, and the unsettling sound of a children's song being played on warship transmitters. And while every eye was looking up, the real operation happened on the ground, in the quiet, in the dark, with nothing more than skill and training, and the absolute refusal to leave those children for 1 minute longer than necessary. The extraction team had entered the facility 17 minutes before the countdown reached 0. They moved through the building in complete silence, using Kreth security codes that their intelligence teams had captured during the days of covert observation. They guided the adult prisoners out first, moving them in small groups through corridors that the team had already mapped in complete detail, timing each movement to the second, based on guard patrol patterns they had memorized. The children came last. Sophie Marsh, the 12-year-old who had been holding her group together for days, was carried out of the facility by a human soldier who held her against his chest with one arm, while his other hand stayed free. That soldier was her father, Sergeant Daniel Marsh, the husband of Governor Ellen Marsh, the woman who had broadcast those 3 words to the entire sector. I learned afterward that Sergeant Marsh had volunteered for the extraction team the moment the operation was authorized. Command had initially denied his request. The reason was standard military protocol. Personal emotional involvement in the rescue of a family member compromised operational objectivity and judgment. Sergeant Marsh had listened to the denial, nodded, and then said 4 words, "Court-martial me after." They let him go. The commanding officer who approved his inclusion later said, in a private communication that I was not supposed to see but did, I looked at him, and I knew that if I said no, he would go anyway. The only question was whether he went with our support or without it. The children were transferred to the human fleet within the hour. Medical teams confirmed that all 7 were physically unharmed, exhausted, hungry, emotionally drained, but unharmed. Sophie Marsh refused to let go of her father's hand for the first 3 hours after the extraction. She did not cry, she did not collapse. She simply held his hand and would not let go, and he held hers back. And for those 3 hours, the hand of a 12-year-old girl and the hand of her father formed a connection that contained within it everything I had tried to explain to Drovan about what humans were willing to do for their children. When Sophie finally released her father's hand, it was because one of the younger children, a 4-year-old boy who had been quiet and withdrawn since the rescue, began to cry. Sophie heard him, turned, walked over, and picked him up. She held him against her shoulder and began singing. The same song, the gentle one. The one that had traveled from a prison cell to a warship fleet to the empty spaces between the stars and back again. I expected the humans to withdraw after that. The mission was complete. The children were safe. The prisoners were recovered. By any rational standard, the objective had been achieved. They could go home, celebrate, add another chapter to the long and remarkable history of humanity's refusal to abandon its own. They did not withdraw. The fleet held position. 9 warships, arrayed in a formation that covered every approach vector and exit point from Kreth space. And then a new transmission came through, on a direct channel to Draven's flagship. Admiral Lucy Hargrove appeared on the screen. She was a woman in her 50s, with gray streaks in her dark hair, and a face that carried the marks of decades spent making difficult decisions under pressure. Her uniform was crisp, her posture was straight. Her expression held no anger, no triumph, no satisfaction, just patience. The deep, structural patience of someone who knows exactly what needs to happen next, and is willing to wait as long as necessary for it to happen. "Warlord Dravan," she said, "the children are safe. The prisoners have been recovered. Your holding facility has been secured by our ground teams. This immediate matter is resolved." A pause, long enough for the words to settle, long enough for Draven to feel, perhaps for the first time, the weight of what he was facing. "Now we are going to discuss how we ensure this never happens again." I sat back in my chair. The tension that had been building in my body for days did not release. It changed form, because I understood what Admiral Hargrove meant, and I understood what was about to begin. The rescue was not the end. It was the first step. Humans did not simply save their children and go home. They did not just stop the bleeding and walk away. They found the thing that caused the wound, and they removed it, permanently, thoroughly, with the same patience and precision that they had used to extract 7 children from a fortified military installation without firing a single shot. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a bottle that I had been saving for an occasion that warranted it. I poured a glass. I took a long, slow sip, and then I turned back to the tactical display. One by one, across the Kreth border region, the defense stations began to go dark. Their power signatures dropped. Their weapon systems went offline. Their communication arrays fell silent, not destroyed, not damaged, simply shut down, as though someone had whispered a command that the machines themselves were compelled to obey. The humans had begun. 3 months passed before I felt ready to write this report. 3 months of follow-up communications and diplomatic conferences, and fact-finding inquiries, and long, quiet evenings spent sitting alone in my office, staring at the stars through the viewport, and thinking about what I had witnessed. The Galactic Union Council has requested a formal account of the Aldenmere incident, as it has come to be known, and I owe it to the historical record to provide one. Not just the facts, though the facts are here, documented in the appendices with full communication logs, and tactical data and diplomatic correspondence, but also the meaning, because the facts alone, stripped of context, would tell you only what happened. They would not tell you why it matters, and it matters. It matters more than anything I have reported in 47 years of diplomatic service. So here is what happened in the 3 months after the children came home. The Kreth Dominion still exists. I want to state that fact clearly and prominently, because it is perhaps the most important detail of the entire affair, and the one that most species find hardest to believe when they hear the full story. The humans did not destroy the Kreth. They had the capability. Every military analyst I have consulted since the incident has confirmed this, and they have done so with the kind of quiet, matter-of-fact certainty that comes from running the numbers multiple times, adjusting variables, stress-testing assumptions, and consistently arriving at the same conclusion. The human fleet that gathered at the Kreth border possessed the firepower, the strategic positioning, the logistical depth, and the operational will to dismantle the Kreth Dominion entirely. Not weaken it, not reduce it, dismantle it, erase it from the map the way the Velkari had been erased. It would have taken weeks, not months. The outcome was never in question. They chose not to. They had the power to destroy, and they chose not to destroy. That restraint is, in my professional opinion, the single most significant and most terrifying thing about the humans, because it means they were not acting out of uncontrolled emotion. They were not consumed by a blind, raging fury that drove them toward maximum destruction without thought or purpose. They were in complete control the entire time. Every ship movement was calculated. Every tactical decision was deliberate. Every moment of silence, and every broadcast of that gentle song, and every second of that ticking countdown was part of a coherent, intentional strategy designed to achieve a specific outcome with the minimum necessary force. The humans were not a storm. Storms are indiscriminate. Storms destroy everything in their path because they cannot choose. The humans could choose, and they did choose, and their choices were precise and measured and exactly as severe as the situation required, and not 1 degree more. What they removed was significant. Every Kreth military installation within 3 systems of human-controlled space was systematically dismantled over the course of 6 weeks. Not bombed from orbit, not reduced to rubble by missile strikes. Human engineering teams, escorted by marine security detachments, landed at each facility, cataloged its contents, removed the weapon systems and defensive equipment, disassembled the structures according to standard decommissioning protocols, and transported everything to a neutral storage depot administered by the Galactic Union. The Kreth soldiers stationed at those facilities were disarmed, processed, and released. None were harmed. The Kreth fleet that had been positioned to defend against the human advance was stood down without a single engagement. Admiral Hargrove accomplished this not through threats, but through a series of precisely crafted communications sent individually to each Kreth ship commander. She spoke to each of them directly. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She explained, calmly and clearly, what the consequences would be if they resisted, and what the outcome would be if they cooperated. She gave each commander time to consider. She gave each one the opportunity to make a choice. Every single commander chose cooperation. Several later cited Admiral Hargrove's communications as the moment they began questioning their loyalty to Warlord Draven, not because she had intimidated them into submission, but because she had treated them with a respect and directness that Draven never had. She had spoken to them as intelligent beings, capable of making rational decisions, and they had responded accordingly. As for Draven himself, the humans did not remove him through force. They did not send soldiers to drag him from his command center or stage a military operation against his personal guard. What they did was simultaneously simpler and more devastating than any military action could have been. They released the complete, unedited record of the Aldenmere incident to every faction leader, every regional governor, every military commander, and every public information network in the Kreth Dominion. Every communication, every decision, every offer made and rejected, every warning given and ignored. The full record of Draven's attempt to keep 2 children as insurance. The full record of his refusal to listen to warnings that could have prevented the crisis entirely. The full record of his military's failure to detect, prevent, or respond to the human extraction operation that had removed 32 prisoners from a supposedly secure facility without triggering a single alarm. The Kreth people saw it all. They saw their warlord take children from their families and call it strategy. They saw him refuse to return those children when given the chance. Not once, but multiple times. They saw him attempt to hold children as bargaining chips in a territorial negotiation. They saw him provoke a superior military force into action through a combination of arrogance and ignorance, and then fail to protect his own people when the consequences arrived. Draven was removed from power by his own people within a week. There was no revolution, no civil war, no dramatic confrontation. His faction leaders withdrew their support quietly, one by one, like pillars being removed from beneath a structure until it could no longer stand. He was arrested by his own personal guard, the same soldiers who had sworn loyalty to him, and placed in a Kreth judicial facility to await trial under Kreth law for endangering the Dominion through reckless leadership. I do not know the outcome of that trial. I did not follow it. The new Kreth government, a coalition of the more moderate faction leaders who had been sidelined under Drafan's rule, signed a formal non-aggression treaty with the human government within a month of taking power. The treaty was comprehensive. It included provisions for the protection of civilian populations, the absolute prohibition of hostage-taking, the establishment of a joint monitoring commission, and the creation of a direct communication channel between Kreth and human military commands to prevent future misunderstandings. It was, by any standard, a fair and even generous agreement. The humans had every justification to demand more. They could have claimed the disputed mineral deposits. They could have demanded reparations. They could have insisted on permanent military bases in Kreth space. They did not. They asked only for the guarantee that this would never happen again. That was their price. Not territory, not resources, not pride. Just the promise, backed by verification mechanisms and enforceable consequences, that no Kreth commander would ever again make the decision that Dravan had made. I attended the treaty signing ceremony as a neutral observer, standing at the back of the conference room with my hands clasped behind my back and my eyes moving between the two delegations. The Kreth representatives looked like beings who had survived a natural disaster and were still trying to process the magnitude of what had happened to them. Their movements were careful. Their voices were subdued. They signed the documents with the deliberate precision of people who understood that they were being given a second chance and did not intend to waste it. The human delegation looked tired. That was the word that came to mind. Not triumphant, not vindictive, not self-congratulatory. Just tired, in the way that people are tired after they have carried something heavy for a long time and have finally been allowed to set it down. Admiral Hargrove was there, sitting at the back of the room in her dress uniform, watching the proceedings, with an expression that I can only describe as patient. She did not speak during the ceremony. She did not need to. After the formalities concluded and the delegations began to disperse, I approached Admiral Hargrove. I do not normally seek out conversations with military commanders at diplomatic events, but I felt compelled to speak with her. There was something I needed to understand, something that all the intelligence reports and strategic analyses and historical precedents could not explain. "Admiral," I said, "may I ask you a question?" She looked at me with steady gray eyes, the kind of eyes that have seen difficult things and have chosen to keep seeing clearly regardless. "Of course, Ambassador. Your fleet had the capability to dismantle the Kreth Dominion entirely. Your people had every reason to do so. The Kreth took your children. In the history of most civilizations, that act alone would be considered sufficient justification for total retaliation. Why did you hold back?" Admiral Hargrove considered the question for a long moment. She was not searching for an answer. I could see that she already knew exactly what she wanted to say. She was considering how to say it in a way that would convey the full weight of its meaning. "Because our children were watching," she said. "Not just the 7 we rescued. Not just the children of Aldenmere. All of them. Every child on every human colony, on every ship, on Earth itself. They were watching to see what we would do with our power. They were watching to see who we would become when we had every justification to become something terrible." She paused. "We wanted them to see that strength does not require cruelty, that being powerful does not mean being merciless, that you can protect everything you love without becoming the thing you are trying to protect them from. We got our children back. That was the mission. Everything that came after, every decision we made about the Kreth, about their fleet, about their government, was made with one question in mind. Can we look those children in the eye afterward and tell them that we did the right thing?" She met my gaze. The answer needed to be yes. Every time, for every decision, yes. I have thought about those words every day since, every single day. 2 weeks after the signing ceremony, I visited the Aldenmere colony as part of a diplomatic goodwill tour organized by the Galactic Union. The colony had been rebuilt with remarkable speed. New structures had replaced the ones damaged in the raid. The defense network had been upgraded. Agricultural systems had been restored and expanded. The physical scars of the attack were healing. But what struck me was not the buildings or the technology. or the efficiency of the reconstruction. It was the sound. The children were outside, playing, running across the open fields that stretched between the colony's residential blocks, their voices carrying through the warm afternoon air in a tangle of shouts and laughter, and the high, bright sounds that human children make when they are completely absorbed in the joy of being alive and having nothing more important to do than chase each other across the grass. I stood at the edge of the field and watched them for a long time. The sun was warm on my skin. The air smelled of growing things, the particular scent of a colony where agriculture and community exist side by side. A gentle wind moved across the field, bending the tall grass in waves. Sophie Marsh was among them. I recognized her from the descriptions Rothan had given me, though she looked different from the girl I had imagined sitting in that cell. Less guarded, less watchful. Her hair was loose instead of pulled back, and she was wearing a bright yellow shirt that caught the sunlight and seemed to glow against the green of the field. She was playing with a younger child, a small boy of perhaps 5, and she was letting him win their game, running just slowly enough that his short legs could close the gap, then pretending to be astonished when he tagged her shoulder. The boy's laughter rang out across the field like a bell. I watched her, and I thought about the cell, the blankets arranged into a shelter, the older children watching the door in shifts, the song taught line by line to frightened 4-year-olds, the calm, steady certainty of a 12-year-old girl who had decided that her job was not to be afraid, but to make sure the others were not afraid either. Near the residential buildings, Governor Ellen Marsh was crouching on the walkway in front of her home. A small girl, perhaps 4 years old, was standing in front of her, one foot raised, wobbling slightly on the other. The governor was tying the girl's shoe. Her fingers worked the laces with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, and her daughter stood with one hand resting on her mother's shoulder for balance, her small face scrunched up with the serious concentration that very young children bring to tasks they are still learning to understand. I felt a tightness in my chest, not the tightness of dread or anxiety. Something different, something that expanded even as it constricted, a feeling that was too large for the space it occupied. Because in that moment, watching that woman tie that small shoe on a sunny afternoon, while her daughter held her shoulder for balance, I finally understood what I had been trying to explain to Draven, and Tessic, and Rothan, and every being who had asked me why the humans were so dangerous. The ferocity I had witnessed over the past months was not aggression. It was not a predatory instinct, or a cultural preference for dominance, or a species-wide tendency toward disproportionate retaliation. It was not strategic, or tactical, or political. It was love. Love compressed into something so dense, so concentrated, so impossibly powerful, that it bent the fabric of galactic civilization around it, like gravity bends light. Love that could cross light years in hours, and silence entire sectors with its approach. Love that could turn scientists into soldiers, and diplomats into warriors, and ordinary parents into the most focused, most determined, most unstoppable force the known galaxy had ever encountered. That was the thing that the Kreth had not understood. That was the thing the Velkari had not understood before them. That was the thing that species after species after species had failed to grasp, had dismissed, had underestimated, had laughed at. Humans were not dangerous because of their technology, though their technology was impressive. They were not dangerous because of their military doctrine, though their tactics were inventive and their strategy was sound. They were not dangerous because of their numbers, or their resources, or their determination, though they possessed all of those things in abundance. They were dangerous because of the small hand reaching up from a blanket fort in a prison cell, because of the shoe that needed tying, because of the song that traveled from a detention center to a warship fleet to the spaces between the stars and back again. They were dangerous because they loved their children, with a ferocity that had no upper limit, no saturation point, no threshold beyond which they would decide that the price was too high, or the odds were too long, or the enemy was too strong. An enemy who fights for territory can be outmaneuvered. An enemy who fights for resources can be outbid. An enemy who fights for pride can be humbled into negotiation. But an enemy who fights for the sound of a child's laughter on a sunny afternoon, that enemy cannot be deterred, cannot be discouraged, cannot be outlasted. I stayed on Aldenmere for 3 more days. I shared meals with the colonists. I listened to their stories, the ordinary stories of ordinary people rebuilding ordinary lives. I watched their children play, and their families cook together, and their community heal in the way that human communities do, not by forgetting what happened, but by choosing to live fully in spite of it. On my last evening, I sat in the small garden behind the guest quarters and watched the sky change color as the sun set. The sounds of the colony settled into the gentle rhythms of evening, doors closing, voices lowering, lights appearing in windows one by one. Somewhere nearby, I could hear a child laughing. I returned to my quarters and began writing this report. I have included every relevant communication, tactical analysis, diplomatic record, and intelligence assessment related to the Aldenmere incident. They are thorough. They are accurate. They tell the story in the language of data and documentation. But I want to conclude with something that goes beyond data, a personal observation, a recommendation, the most important recommendation I have ever made in 47 years of diplomatic service. I have served the Galactic Union across 9 major interstellar conflicts and 23 treaty negotiations. I have witnessed civilizations rise and fall, alliances form and fracture, wars begin and end. In all of that time, across all of those experiences, I have never encountered a species that taught me more about the nature of true strength than the humans did during the Aldenmere incident. They showed us that strength is not the capacity to destroy. It is the capacity to choose restraint when destruction is justified. It is the willingness to fight with everything you possess for the things that matter most, combined with the wisdom to stop fighting once those things are safe. It is the ability to look at a defeated enemy and say, "You will survive this. You will learn from this. And we will make sure you never forget it." They showed us what happens when you touch the one thing they will never, under any circumstances, allow to be taken from them. I have drafted a recommendation. I am submitting it to the Galactic Union Council through official channels, with my personal seal and my full diplomatic credentials. I am requesting that it be inscribed into the Galactic Code of Conduct for Interspecies Relations, Article 1, Section 1, Line 1. Before any other provision, before any other guideline, before any other rule. It reads as follows: Do not touch the children. Do not take the children. Do not threaten the children. If you have done any of these things, return them immediately and beg. You will not receive a second chance. I have requested that a copy of this recommendation be distributed to every government, every military command, every diplomatic mission, and every educational institution in the Galactic Union. I want it taught in schools. I want it posted in military academies. I want it printed on the first page of every intelligence briefing that any species compiles about humanity. I want it to be so well known, so universally understood, so deeply embedded in the collective awareness of every civilization in the galaxy, that no leader, no commander, no soldier, and no fool ever again makes the mistake that Warlord Draven made. Whether they listen is beyond my control. I have done what I can. I have spoken the truth as clearly as I am able to speak it. I have presented the evidence. I have made my case. But I will say this, and I will say it plainly, without diplomatic softening or careful qualification. If someone reads this report and still decides to take human children, if someone reviews the complete historical record and still believes they can use those children as leverage or hostages or bargaining chips or instruments of political pressure, then that someone is beyond my help, beyond anyone's help. I will not warn them. I will not plead with them. I will not spend my time or my energy or my remaining years trying to save someone who has been given every piece of evidence they need and has chosen to ignore it all. I will simply step aside, because by that point, the humans are already coming. The countdown has already begun. The song is already playing on every frequency. And nothing in this galaxy, nothing that has ever existed or will ever exist, is going to stop them from reaching their children. I closed my writing terminal. The observation post was quiet. Fennec had retired hours ago, and the corridor outside my office was dark and empty. Through the viewport, I could see the stars, thousands of them, scattered across the void like sparks from a fire that refused to go out. Somewhere out there, on a small colony world called Aldenmere, a 12-year-old girl named Sophie was probably sleeping in her own bed. Her father was in the next room. Her mother was down the hall. The blanket fort had been replaced by a real bedroom, with real walls and a real window that looked out over the fields where she played in the sunlight. And she slept without fear, because she had always known, from the very beginning, what would happen if anyone tried to take her away. Someone would come. I whispered to the empty room, to no one and to everyone, to the record and to the future, and to every being who would ever read these words. I told them all. Then I turned off the light and sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the silence of the stars. Next time, whoever is foolish enough to try, I will not even bother warning. I will simply watch the countdown begin.